Welcome to the Just Race podcast. I'm your host, Joe Sweeney, and today on the show, we are diving into direct-to-consumer, D2C, and e-commerce. Our guest is Adii Pienaar, founder and CEO of Cogsy, a company that helps brands run their supply chains more efficiently. Adii has been in the world of e-commerce for decades, having started WooCommerce before this, and he is a fantastic source for everything going on in the industry and how it's evolved from web hosting in the beginning to supply chain and operations today. I hope you enjoy the episode. Adii, it is great to have you on the show. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast. I'm really excited to dive into direct-to-consumer. So to start off, how did you end up in this space and what are you building at Cogsy?
I mean, I guess like how I ended up in this space, Joe, is that way back in 2007, I saw an opportunity to build templates, themes in the WordPress space. We launched WooCommerce in 2010, and the short version there is kind of WooCommerce was the result of us ultimately working with more and more businesses on the theme side and them telling us, hey guys, I have no easy way to sell currently. I've got my WordPress website and I see other websites like other businesses starting to kind of sell online and adding that typical kind of shopping cart functionality because that's what it was way back then. We too could ultimately not find a great solution for WordPress, which is why we ultimately built WooCommerce. So we built this thing. We put this thing called WooCommerce out there. And within a year, it completely changed our business. I think, if I remember correctly, it flipped our revenue. WooCommerce became 90% of our revenue within a year. And we were growing exponentially at that stage, right? So fast forward that to where we are today, 12 years later. Subsequent to WooCommerce, I built a company called Conversia, where we built email marketing automation for e-commerce brands. So I lived in that kind of marketing realm within e-commerce as well. And today, with Cogsy at least, we're in the back office, right? We're building a tool to help brands better kind of operationalize themselves. We pitch ourselves as being your extra head of operations. And before I'll pause, and this is not my idea, I just realized that this has been my journey as well. But what we have seen in online commerce is that there's been three phases. The first part was all around kind of, we need the platforms available. We need the kind of payment processing infrastructure. Like all those things needed to democratize commerce for a greater group of people, right? And that's the realm in which the likes of WooCommerce and Shopify plays, and along with all the payment processors. And then the second wave was all around marketing and distribution. Right? How do I connect with an audience? Which is why today, like many other kind of soon to be, I think, public companies, the likes of Klaviyo, Yotpo, like they were very, very early movers in that space. And then I think where we find ourselves today, not just due to the pandemic, is there's a lot of focus on anything operations, supply chain, logistics, finance, all those back office features now. Like the tooling for those things like have been neglected in the last couple of years because it's been founders have gone after, and this is not criticism, all founders, myself included, flocked to this kind of, hey, there's attention here to build new marketing tools, to build tools to reach a bigger audience, to sell more, to kind of upsell more, all those kind of things. And it created the space now and created this need for a new way of tools to help brands better operationalize themselves.
That's a really interesting breakdown of direct-to-consumer that I haven't heard before. It sounds like stage one was actually make it easy to sell online, transact, host a website, which is a lot of what WooCommerce did, Shopify, other players along those lines. Two is connect with the audience, but now we have, Instagram ads and Etsy and a ton of other brands that are all focused on aggregating the audience, and there's a whole ecosystem built around that. And now three is really what you're working on here, which is the finance tools. So everything from like back ordering to the way you described it before the call was, and you said you wouldn't sell it this way because it's for maybe accountants, but it expands your operating margin. I think that's actually a really interesting way to explain it. Can you break down what that actually means?
So what I didn't tell you, by the way, Joe, first is that I, prior to to co-founding WooCommerce, my dad wanted me to be a chartered accountant. So I am a fully qualified accountant. As I said here, never did my professional exams because WooCommerce took over life, and I went down a different path. But that kind of accountant's hat, or living close to the actual numbers, has always been a big part of how I've built businesses. And I think when I think about Cogsy, at least, is we can ultimately help you optimize the working capital that you have allocated. Much of the working capital for retail brands or DTC brands today is in inventory, right? So like any optimization that you can make there is really helpful. And this is not just about, for example, not running out of stock or not like overstocking on products that don't sell well. I think the crucial thing that like we're trying to get to and educate the market on is that when you don't get to some kind of optimal allocation of working capital in your operations, there's opportunity costs involved, right? Like, i.e., like if you had another $10,000 available in cash today, like what else can you do with that in your business? And like that's it's always a hypothetical question, right? Because it's always like, well, we're speculating, and we actually don't know what the value could be. But so often, and especially fast growing brands, they find themselves in that situation where their cash flow never properly settles and normalizes, right? They're growing so well, but they could probably be growing much better. And better here is either you grow faster, you grow with a better set of customers, you grow with greater margin, etc. There's multiple, or you just grow in a more calm fashion, right? Like the house is just not on fire because you have the cash flow available to actually hire someone to do certain tasks and add bandwidth and capacity.
Yeah, so I'd love to dive into the product. It sounds like, fundamentally, like a lot in direct to consumer, this is not a new technology. It's fundamentally a new business model. And what does that product actually look like? Like, what are kind of the core things around, what are the core features that Cogsy is putting in place that help founders?
My initial kind of gut feel when we started working on Cogsy about a year ago now was that it would be that tool that could help even the smallest brands just starting up, kind of help them better operationalize their business. And what we found very quickly, wasn't very quickly, but in the last year, and what we're optimizing for now, is that it very much is a tool for brands that are already doing $1 million plus a year, into kind of closer to 100 million on the top end. And the kind of the reason for that is the tool is well suited to help businesses scale. Like we can't help you with the initial product development, the product market fit, like the branding, finding at least one customer acquisition channel that works. Like all of those things like need to happen first before a tool like Cogsy becomes relevant. That is why we've also seen loads of new capital options or fundraising options or mechanisms for DTC brands popping up, right? Because we're essentially acknowledging that in that first phase, the way that they prove out product market fit looks different and it's very capital intensive, and you're probably not doing that in any way that resembles profitability. So I mean, I've seen many pitch decks in the last couple of months, right? And there's always this kind of U-shaped hockey curve in terms of kind of what the founders or the operators expect growth will look like and what the kind of, whether it's gross margin or EBITDA will be, right? It's like, if you think through product market fit, probably doing smaller quantities from manufacturers, your unit economics suck, you're spending like loads to figure out the markets, etc. Right? So it's not profitable at that stage. But then as soon as you hit that kind of product market fit and you start scaling, that's where you can start tapping into those smaller optimizations in your business. So with all that kind of preamble, what we do today is we've built two primary actions that is already kind of working really well. The one is a smarter purchase order flow. So literally button in the app that says generate recommended purchase order. And we will forecast your demand, check what is on hand, as well as what you have incoming through all of our various data integrations. And we will spin up optimal purchase order for you. And you can, as operator, can just review that. You click a button, you send it off to your kind of your vendor or your purchasing flow, right? So really, again, we'll take the first couple of steps for you. You just need to take that last step. And then the second action there is customer-centered back orders. So we essentially empower brands to continue selling even though they're out of stock on certain SKUs. And because we have the demand forecasted as well as that kind of schedule of incoming products, we can tell the customer on the front end that this product's out of stock now, but this next ships on 27 Feb, as an example.
To give an example, my girlfriend Sam is starting a line of modern convenience stores. She used to run a direct-to-consumer business, and now she runs a concept store called Players Cafe. And in every Players Cafe, they're selling hundreds of direct-to-consumer brands, and mostly from founders she knows. And they have a lot of stock in the back. They also sell online. And when I've seen both direct-to-consumer brands run, like selling everything from t-shirts to other products, they order from factories, they'll fill their stock room, that type of stuff. And it's a lot more effective if you order from your supplier when you actually need the thing shipped out, kind of like a drop shipping business. And what you're talking about is you allow them to not have to buy thousands of units up front because Cogsy automatically orders based on demand, what's supply, what's incoming, and that unlocks a lot of cash that you can just use for a lot of other things. It's good to have cash now as opposed to in the future.
Exactly, and I think like the pinnacle of this, or that kind of unattainable goal, I think that every business would have here, is that you essentially have a just-in-time system, right? So where as soon as a customer places an order, that unit gets kind of made, and there is no lag between those things, because the lag between those things is what capital needs to cover, right? So it's never possible to do that. The best retail and DTC brands, like, they don't deploy that model. If they do drop shipping, it is still their own products, right? Like, drop shipping as a tactic is different from the dropshipping businesses, right? Dropshipping as a tactic is just like, you don't ship this yourself. Like, you get a third party to ship this. So like, yes, the idea there is we can be that proactive monitor and tell you, hey Joe, I know you just placed a purchase order yesterday for 100 units. You sold significantly more yesterday already than what you expected. You should either increase that purchase order, you should place another purchase order, whatever the case is, right? And like, it's not a case, like, we can push that to you and we can constantly alert you to that, which also means you can trust us and buy back your time, right, to focus on other things, because you don't constantly need to be crunching the numbers in terms of what is the stock you need.
Where do you want to take Cogsy? So right now you're very focused on this financial engineering aspect for direct-to-consumer brands, bigger companies that are selling online. Where do you think this could go, especially as someone who's built in this space for so long?
For me, the first thing that we are already working towards is we're really trying to reimagine what a operational kind of planning tool looks like for retail brands. I think if you start speaking to retail brands and operators at these brands, you're going to find that 99% of the cases, there's still a spreadsheet somewhere that is like integral to running their business, right? And like, I don't think that behavior is going to change anytime soon, right? I mean, the old joke in SaaS is always that your first kind of competition for a new solution is always an intern with a spreadsheet, right? Like, that's what you're competing against. And I don't think this is untrue here. So what we're at least trying to do is, like, there's been a wave of tools that I cheekily call spreadsheets on steroids, right? So they're connected spreadsheets, they're evolved, they've got specific workflows built into it, and they're better than a normal spreadsheet, an Excel sheet or a Google sheet, but they still look and function like spreadsheet, right? Like rows, columns, values that you can put in. And to me, that's just boring. I think like our mission, at least with Cogsy for the foreseeable future, is to truly reimagine that, right? And I think the analogy I always kind of use here is, like, why is the workflow always that you need to essentially adjust kind of the values in a numerical model to visualize what the output is? Like, why can't you start with the visual output, manipulate the visual output, and that gives you the numbers? Like, surely that's a kind of a way different kind of experience here. And like, that sounds like, I think for people that love spreadsheets, that probably sounds like I'm being super blasphemous. But I think the point here is just that we've become so used to spreadsheets that we just accepted this as the status quo forever, and we've stopped reimagining what this should be. And I think that's the key for us here as well. Is like in your question about like what I think this becomes. There's loads of things that I kind of pitch to my investors, for example, where I'm very coherent about what that strategy is. Like ultimately, the first step here, like all of those things fail if we can't reimagine what an operational kind of planning tool looks like here and how that kind of drives value. Like we are fundamentally trying to change the way brands like interact with their data, how they make decisions, how they take action. Like that is the key thing here. Like I need to get brands away from spreadsheets. Like spreadsheets are not serving them. Spreadsheets on steroids are slightly better, but that's also not serving them. Like we can do better.
Yeah, that's a fascinating idea in that people who use spreadsheets, people who are masters of Excel, will never leave Excel. But for founders or just operations people who are aiming to get to an ideal outcome, yeah, starting with the graph and then having AI or, whatever software work on the back end to get there and do all your orders for you, that's pretty interesting.
I cut my teeth as an entrepreneur within the WordPress space, open source, right? I don't believe in kind of zero-sum games. Like I believe a rising tide lifts all boats. I'm not like, when I say I'm not overly concerned about competition, I mean like there's more than enough kind of TAM here for all of us to kind of operate in, right? So like, that's just a preface here. What I wanted to say was switching an operator away from a spreadsheet is hard when you also just have a tool that looks like a spreadsheet, is better, but you're charging them $50K a year for it, right? Like it's not as compelling. And my hypothesis here, Cogsy is not the first tool in the space trying to make a dent here. There's incumbents here, incumbents that I think have done, or from the outside, I'm not intimately familiar, seems to have built good businesses, and none of them have been a breakout success. In fact, on top of this whole pile somewhere still sits NetSuite, right? $8 billion, kind of market cap last time I checked, $8-9 billion. Absolutely nobody loves using NetSuite, right? Most of their interfaces looks like a bad version of a spreadsheet on steroids. But the reason why they've not been unseated from that spot is everyone else that's tried to do that have been like incremental improvements. And an incremental improvement is not going to shift behavior sufficiently to unseat such a massive incumbent, right? And again, like I think for anyone that's ever listened to me speak about anything in the last 12 years, right? Like WooCommerce is a completely bootstrap business. With Cogsy, we raised we've raised $6 million to date, right? Whole different business, whole different kind of journey and motion for me as a founder. And the reason for that is purely we have bought ourselves time and resources to not do the obvious thing here and build a neat and tidy, cute business. Like we are here to reimagine what this needs to look like.
So incremental improvements, better than Excel 1.1, 1.2, 1.4 will never unseat Excel, but you're incrementally moving towards a completely different user experience through a slightly different product to start.
That's the mission, at least, right? I think, and that's in my mind, actually, Joy, like that is what institutional venture capital is there for as well, right? Like investors are asking founders to, and this is not me drinking the Kool-Aid. I think there are multiple ways to fund and grow a business. And, there should be founder alignment and product alignment in terms of those things. I don't discriminate against any of those. What I'm saying for what we are trying to do, like we need a little more time. Like we need to buy ourselves some margin to play with different ideas without necessarily knowing what is best. Because we are we're trying to change someone's behavior, and we're trying to change a behavior that's really kind of rooted in so much of what all of us understand about how to run a business. Like ask any founder or operator, like to what extent they use spreadsheets, and they're going to tell them like, I've got a couple of spreadsheets for various different things, right? I've got it, like me as Adii in Cogsy, I have a couple of spreadsheets for certain things in the business, right? So like, I don't think Cogsy doesn't necessarily ever unseat spreadsheets completely, but it should, as I said, I think for very specific use cases, it should replace that or substitute that or complement it. And that's like, I think ultimately what we're trying to then do is, unseat a behemoth in NetSuite. That's something that gets me excited, right? That's something that I can imagine myself working towards for the next 7, 8, 9 years, whatever the case is.
How have you seen direct-to-consumer evolve over your career? Because you've been in it for a long time. And are there any technologies or business models, you mentioned new financing options, that you think are particularly interesting right now?
The best brands are hiring someone to run operations much sooner, right? So I think 5 years ago, the first hire for most brands were like some kind of growth marketer, right? Growth hacker, whatever the terminology was. Like, I think that was what they were trying to figure out. The best brands these days seem to be hiring an operations person much, much sooner. And I'm also seeing, operators, like very experienced operators from traditional businesses, right? Traditional businesses, I mean, like bigger kind of corporations, moving to direct to consumer brands to help them kind of scale better sooner. And again, I think like the outcome there, having that person is a better understanding of what happens below the line, right? So like all those unit economics, how different decisions impact that, like is very, very helpful because that creates the margin for them to do better things, whether it's on the growth side, whether it's in the product development side, that can accelerate product development, expand the catalog, or getting into those opportunity costs, like really understanding what this looks like and being able to explore those. In terms of technologies, Joe, I think the things that excite me and also excite me as a kind of angel investor as I think through these things are the things that will create a more robust supply chain. Not a company I invested in, but a company called Factored Quality. And effectively what they do, like you should totally have the founders in here. They'll do a much better pitch here, but they help kind of take brands in the States to essentially kind of do quality assurance or quality inspections of their goods in the factory abroad, right? So where it's hard to fly people kind of between continents and do this on a regular basis, you don't necessarily want to open up an office in China or like wherever else you're manufacturing. They actually have software for that. Like things like solutions that building a more robust supply chain, I think is interesting. I think new channels are interesting. So another company that comes to mind, a company called VideoWise, making kind of essentially allowing brands to take any video content and make it shoppable, like if they're tagged in it. I think like just doubling down on, I believe they might have just released a TikTok or are about to release a TikTok kind of feature. It only works for YouTube and Instagram at the moment.
A TikTok marketplace will definitely be popular.
Exactly right. So anything like again, like I think through new channels, like following what kind of consumers are doing, behaviors, and essentially having technology that kind of doubles down on that. And I think like other things in terms of where creators live, right, and how you can essentially arm and empower creators to sell your goods. Like I think that's interesting. You're either in one or two buckets in my mind. Like either you are like, here's a way to find more new customers, right? Which is the case in kind of VideoWise or empowering creators, or on the back end of that, how do I operationalize a business to make sure that I can drive loyalty and retention and serve these customers, right?
Yeah, that's fascinating. Physical production, new channels, so things like selling on TikTok, and creators. Those are things I talk about a lot. You've worked with so many of these businesses over the years. You've always kind of been a founder building a platform for direct-to-consumer founders to get started on top of. What do you think makes a good, consumer brand?
I always love Kevin Kelly kind of the idea of 1,000 truth fans, right? And I think like if I were to build a DTC brand today, like that is what I would figure out. Like, what can I produce to create the kind of experience, like across brand, product, and actually kind of selling you a good, handing you that good, that creates like 1,000 like rabid fans, like I think that's where I would start, right? And I think, like, to what I said earlier, the first phase of any direct to consumer brand is finding that product market fit. I think if you get that affinity from your customers, where you sell software or a consumer good, I think that's moot, right? But getting that affinity and familiarity in terms of building relationships is key. So that's what I would do with a direct consumer brand. Is I would think, like, how can I create this widget and then create such a brand and experience around it that people just absolutely love? And I think that's what's already working. Realistically, if you have a look at any market in any space, there are so many options these days, right? I think I saw a picture the other day of a whole aisle of kind of your new water-based kind of your drinks in Whole Foods, for example. All direct consumer brands, all started in the last couple of years. Like, consumers have way kind of too many options, right? That like they can't figure out across like 10 different drinks, like which one I really want and need. And on a shelf like that, the only thing you have ultimately is that brand affinity. Like, how can I stand out? And if you can't solve for that, then I think, it's going to be a uphill battle in terms of building business.
Any tactics for finding those first 1,000 true fans, really building that brand affinity with customers?
I would scour like subreddits, right? Like, I think subreddits often have like the most passionate group of like small group of people about a very specific thing. Like, and I would probably start there, right? And like, and start with like 10 people and then 50 and then 100, and just see what kind of what resonates there. I think the advantage that I've always had in building software is relatively cost efficient to design mock-ups, for example, and pitch a group of kind of prospective customers mock-ups and have a conversation around, would this be valuable, etc., doing that customer development and iterating. For a physical product, it's obviously harder to do that. But that's how I would think through those. Like, how can you... I was listening to a fascinating episode the other day from the founders of NeuroGum, and how they also, like, I think, if I remember correctly, they had to spend 15 or 20K over 3 runs where they would essentially make small batches of gum, and they would get like 1,000 pieces, whatever the case was, and they would have to taste it, and they would hand it out to their friends and colleagues and whatnot to taste, because they were still in gigs. So, but that's the process to go through. Like, find people, be able to figure out like how can you put, like, even if the unit economics suck, just put something in their hand, iterate based on feedback, and then ramp up from there. Like, as soon as you get to a point where like, okay, we're good now, like we can actually manufacture a larger quantity of this, and we know that we've got 50 or 100 people here that absolutely love this and paid for it. I think that's a crucial thing. Like, never, if I ask you, hey Joe, would you buy this pen from me? Like, it doesn't help you to say, sure, Adii, I'll pay you $10 for it. If you like, I actually need to get that $10, right? Like, I think I've seen many founders make that mistake, and I've made that myself, right? The verbal commitment to buy something is not the same than actually swiping a credit card.
Yeah, I mean, everybody wants to be supportive, and sure, of course I'll buy it. But if you actually want me, if you want $300 from me or any amount of money, yeah, you have to like provide real value, and that's when the rubber hits the road.
Exactly.
My last question for everybody on the show is about vision. Where do you think, or where would you like to see Cogsy in 10 or 15 years?
That's a very long time frame, Joe. I think ultimately, going back to what the vision is here, like, I would want for us to be known as the company that reimagined something that was a very entrenched behavior before. Like, that should always be part of it. But for the rest of it, I actually have a very internal perspective. I think for my co-founder Stefan and I, what is more important is how we empowered the team that we work with, right? How we were a people-first organization. I think those things are ultimately, on the totem pole, like, almost more interesting than the actual product stuff and the commercial stuff. Like, if we can build the kind of team and company that allows and empowers team members over time to live the life that they want, and take that next step, whatever that next step is, whether it's the next gig for them, whether it's building their own business, like whatever, that doesn't matter. But those things are fascinating. And I would love to have that reputation in market that, you know what, and anyone listening here can, if they go to our website, like we do what many other companies do, which is we publish our values and stuff. Like I would love to be known as the company that like we truly love those values, like we truly embodied them, and we were known to do that. And if there's a single one of those values, it would be empowerment, right? I think I love the idea of being able to create a corporation, a commercial vehicle that has the byproduct or even the purpose of empowering absolutely everyone that it engages or interacts with.
That's an awesome vision. And this has been fascinating. I love the direct-to-consumer space. It's a really interesting one because it's, everything we actually touch and feel on a day-to-day basis. And this has been really interesting. I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, Joe. And if Sam needs any help forecasting demand for her stores, you've got my email.
Oh, I will connect you for sure.
Awesome.